Close your eyes and picture this. A narrow alleyway in the dead of night, its damp walls rising on either side like silent sentinels. Streetlight flickers overhead, casting shifting patterns across the wet concrete. You look down to see a man slowly coming to his senses, lying on the cold ground as if someone had dropped him there and left him for dead. He blinks, confusion heavy in his gaze. There's not a hint of recognition in his eyes. It's as if his past were wiped clean, leaving nothing but the faint echo of a name he cannot recall. A distant hum of traffic echoes through the alley, reminding you both that life goes on elsewhere in the city, even if, for this man, time seems to have stalled. He winces as he pushes himself upright, checking his pockets in desperation for any scrap of information about who he is. His hands come up empty. The only thing he finds is a mounting sense of unease, a chill at the back of his neck suggesting he might not be alone. In the far corner, where the light doesn't quite reach, you sense a presence, an unknown watcher, perhaps, or just the trick of a weary mind. As he takes in his surroundings, a tangle of rusty fire escapes, overflowing dumpsters, and torn posters fluttering in a sudden gust of wind. You can almost feel his pulse quicken. With each labored breath, he realizes he knows nothing about this place, or himself. It's like a stage set for a play he never auditioned for. Even so, an unmistakable determination begins to spark in his eyes. Something tells him that the truth is out there, buried in the labyrinth of this imposing city, and if he can just find the right thread to pull, everything may come undone, or at last come together. A faint hum draws his attention toward the street beyond the alley's mouth. Gathering his courage, he steps carefully over broken glass and soggy newspapers, each footstep echoing in the narrow corridor. The city lights seem brighter now, beckoning him forward. He realizes that if any answers exist, they lie out there amidst the neon glow and restless crowds. He can't remember his name, but he feels an undeniable pull propelling him on. The alley widens into a side street lined with shuttered storefronts. An ancient lamppost flickers overhead, revealing a small metal object glinting on the ground. Instinctively, he bends down to pick it up. It's a key, worn around the edges and stained with something that looks like rust. Though it appears ordinary at first glance, the weight of it in his hand stirs an odd familiarity. Could it unlock a door, a box, or perhaps the mystery of who he is? Before he can reflect further, a flurry of movement catches his eye at the far end of the street. A figure in the shadows, still too distant to make out any details, stands perfectly still, as though studying him. His heart thuds in his chest, and he clutches the key tighter, not yet ready to show any fear. But the figure moves too quickly, slipping behind a corner. All that remains is the lingering sense that he has just brushed against something bigger than himself. Unable to shake the feeling that he's being watched, he tucks the key into his pocket. Each step away from that eerie emptiness feels like treading deeper into unknown territory. Still, the key's weight is strangely comforting. A small but tangible reminder that he isn't starting entirely from zero. Somewhere in this vast city, there's a lock that belongs to him, and maybe, just maybe, that lock will open a door to his past. He follows the wavering glow of distant streetlights, the slick pavement guiding him into a district where the city's pulse thrums with a different energy. Muffled music filters through half-closed doors, and neon signs flicker overhead like restless fireflies. Drawn by the sound of clattering stalls and the tang of cooking spices, he soon finds himself in a cramped marketplace. Rows of vendors call out to passers-by, promising everything from steaming bowls of noodles to handcrafted leather goods. As he weaves through the throng, a feeling of cautious hope begins to stir. Perhaps someone here has seen him before or recognizes his face. But when he opens his mouth to ask, the words falter. How can he pose the question without even knowing what name to give? Still, desperation wins out. He approaches one of the vendors, a wiry man selling colorful scarves, and stammers a polite greeting. The vendor, initially friendly, grows uncertain under the weight of the stranger's unspoken distress. A silent tension hangs between them, and the encounter ends with the vendor shaking his head apologetically, unable to offer any real help. Before he can press on, a light touch on his shoulder makes him jump. Spinning around, he meets the gaze of a woman in a long, charcoal gray coat. She seems neither young nor old, her face guarded, yet not unkind. In a voice that barely rises above the market's din, she asks if he's lost. There's a flicker in her eyes, pity or curiosity, he can't tell. Though part of him wants to bolt, something about her calm demeanor keeps him rooted. He finds himself wondering if she holds a piece of the puzzle he's trying so desperately to solve. But before he can answer, she glances over his shoulder. A subtle shift in her expression betrays alarm, as if she's seen something or someone she fears. Without another word, she disappears into the crowd, leaving him more unsettled than ever. Barely a moment passes before he spots movement at the periphery of his vision, a dark silhouette slipping behind a nearby stall. His pulse quickens. The thought that he's been followed all this time feels more real than ever. Instinct wars with logic, run or confront. Yet some pull inside him craves answers more than safety. Casting a final glance at the place where the woman vanished, he sets off after the flicker of darkness. The market's commotion works against him. He dodges shoppers, sidesteps crates of produce, and nearly trips over a cart stacked with cheap electronics. Through the shifting crowd, he catches glimpses of a figure in a hooded jacket, always just out of reach. When he finally breaks free of the congested stalls, the street opens up into a maze of narrow roads. Sodium lamps flicker overhead, painting everything in a tired yellow glow. A sense of urgency propels him onward as he tries to close the distance. A sudden turn, and he's nearly upon the stranger, close enough to catch a glint of eyes watching him intently. But before he can speak or reach out, the figure darts down a side alley. Without thinking, he bolts after them, adrenaline surging with each footfall. The echo of his footsteps reverberates off claustrophobic walls, the sound amplifying the thrill of the pursuit. For a fleeting second, doubt creeps in. He has no idea who this person is or why they're running, only that he needs to know. Then, abruptly, the alley opens onto a deserted street. He skids to a halt, breath ragged. There's no sign of the hooded figure. It's as if the night itself swallowed them whole. The distant hum of traffic, the faint neon glow, and the pounding of his heart are the only things keeping him tethered to the present. With the key still tucked in his pocket, he's left standing in the empty street, feeling more certain than ever that he's being herded toward truths he can't yet grasp. He stands there, breath still ragged, letting the clammy night air fill his lungs. The silence presses in on him, an eerie contrast to the bustling marketplace he left behind. In that hush, a flicker of something stirs in the back of his mind, as though a curtain has lifted just enough to let in a sliver of light. A single name, maybe his own, maybe someone else's, surfaces briefly, only to vanish again before he can grasp it. The ache in his temples intensifies, but so does his resolve. A surge of questions rushes in. Who is he chasing? Why do they seem to know more about him than he does about himself? Is that woman in the gray coat an ally, or yet another puzzle piece? Each stray thought tangles in his head, forming a knot of half-memories and vague impressions. In a desperate attempt to find clarity, he retrieves the key from his pocket. Under the anemic glow of a street lamp, the metal catches the light, revealing faint scratches along its edge. Whether these marks are wear and tear or deliberate etchings, he can't be sure. A gust of wind picks up, rustling a tattered poster on a nearby wall. Its edges curl back, exposing faded headlines about a high-profile investigation gone awry. Something about the names and dates leaps out at him, triggering the faintest echo of recognition. A scene flashes in his mind. A cramped room with files spread across a desk, a voice warning him of hidden threats. Just as quickly, the memory recedes, and he's left with a hollow sense of urgency. He knows, deep down, that these fragments point to something bigger, something that led him here, lost and alone in a city of shadows. Gently pressing his hand against the wall to steady himself, he makes a silent promise. He will track down every clue, every face that drifts in and out of his fractured memories. Because somewhere, just beyond the fog in his mind, lies an answer worth fighting for. An unspoken certainty pulls him onward, drawing him through a winding series of side streets until he stumbles upon a tall, dilapidated building, its windows boarded, its walls scrawled with graffiti. Despite its abandoned appearance, a faint glow seeps through the cracks in one of the upper floors, hinting at life within. With a final glance over his shoulder, he steps inside. The ground floor is strewn with debris, crumpled newspapers, shards of broken glass, and the stale scent of neglect. But beyond the disrepair, something feels off, as if the place has been visited recently. He makes his way up a dimly lit staircase, every step creaking loudly in the silence. Near the top, a series of muffled voices filters through a door left slightly ajar. He tenses, heart hammering. In the sliver of exposed space, he glimpses a figure hunched over a desk piled high with files and photographs. The atmosphere crackles with tension like a countdown before an inevitable explosion. Leaning closer, he recognizes the face of the woman in the charcoal gray coat, now bathed in the pale light of a single lamp. She speaks in hushed tones to someone just out of sight. Suddenly, his knee grazes a loose chunk of wood on the landing, sending it tumbling down the stairs with a hollow clatter. Silence descends behind the door. The woman's voice halts. For a moment, he contemplates flight, his instincts screaming that this could be a trap. Yet the same force that led him here now compels him to push the door open. His eyes lock onto hers, a dozen unanswered questions thrumming between them. The air grows thick as another person steps into view, a tall silhouette with an unmistakable aura of menace. And just like that, he realizes he has walked straight into the heart of the very mystery he's been chasing, a place where the next move will decide more than his forgotten past. It will define whether he has any future at all. He stands frozen in the doorway, the raw tension in the air making every second stretch. Across the room, the woman in the charcoal gray coat lowers her voice, as if trying to calm the tall figure. When she turns to him, her eyes flicker with recognition and something else. Relief, perhaps, or regret. He doesn't move, but the soft click of a gun cocking behind the tall figure jolts him into a stark awareness. Any wrong move now could be his last. A beat passes before the woman slowly raises her hand to gesture him closer. Heart thundering in his chest, he steps forward. The single lamp on the desk throws their shadows in sharp relief, revealing a clutter of documents, photographs, newspaper clippings, and a small leather notebook full of cryptic markings. A half-remembered image flashes in his mind. He's seen these files before, pored over them in secret meetings, searching for a truth that powerful people wanted kept in the dark. The tall figure steps aside, revealing a safe built into the wall, its door ajar. A jolt of realization seizes him. Without hesitation, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out the key that guided him all this way. In that charged moment, memory pours back like a flood. He was once part of an investigation, unearthing details about a massive cover-up involving politicians, corporate moguls, and a string of mysterious disappearances. But the deeper he dug, the more powerful enemies he made. Ultimately, they had silenced him, wiped his memory clean, hoping he'd never piece together the puzzle. He slides the key into the safe's lock. It turns smoothly, like reuniting with an old friend. Inside, a trove of evidence. Files implicating officials, records of illicit transactions, and the missing pieces of his own past. The woman steps closer, her voice trembling with urgency. She explains that she was his contact, the last ally he had before everything went wrong. The tall figure, once a bitter rival, lowered the gun for reasons he can't fully fathom, perhaps convinced that keeping this information hidden no longer serves anyone's interest. In the hush that follows, he understands the weight of the choice before him. He can expose everything, ending careers and risking his own life in the process. Or he can slip back into anonymity, free from the scrutiny that nearly destroyed him. The woman's gaze searches his, and he senses her quiet plea, "Do the right thing." Drawing a slow breath, he gathers the files under one arm. Somewhere out there, the city still bustles, oblivious to the shockwaves about to hit. He steps away from the safe, locking eyes with the tall figure in a silent truce. Then, with the woman at his side, he heads for the exit. A new road lies ahead, uncertain and fraught with danger, but illuminated by the steady burn of truth. When he steps onto the street, dawn is breaking. Pale light spills over the skyline, and for the first time, the city feels less like a labyrinth and more like a place where he can finally reclaim who he was, while forging who he might become. The key rattles in his pocket, a reminder of all he's regained and the weight of what he now carries. Then he sets off, each stride heavy with resolve, knowing there's no going back to the man who woke up with nothing. A new chapter has begun.